Time now for the last word with Simone Sanders Townsend in for Lawrence this evening, which is just not a privilege I get very much. You and I talk every weekend morning, but I'm on the other end of it. I'm saying goodbye to you, and I'm starting my show. This is kind of fun, Simone.
It's refreshing. It's refreshing. I will see you tomorrow, Ali Velshi.
I look forward to that. Get some sleep tonight, my friend. Have yourself a great show.
Thanks. You too. So Donald Trump spent much of his Friday working the phones to save himself and Mike Johnson from another House Republican Speaker vote humiliation, which he did, barely. And he also spent it whining that flags will be at half-staff on Inauguration Day in honor of the late President Jimmy Carter. But that was the least of Donald Trump's problems today, because this afternoon he found out that he will be sentenced next Friday in his criminal hush money case. We're going to have more on that later in the program with MSNBC legal analyst Barbara McQuaid. Now, today, shortly before Judge Merchan set Donald Trump's sentencing date, Mike Johnson won his first full term as Speaker of the House of Representatives. But it wasn't before Republican holdouts who initially voted against Mike Johnson this afternoon switched their votes, allowing him to squeak through on the first ballot. Today, Mike Johnson credited his win to Donald Trump.
Voice and his influence is of singular importance. So grateful to have his support. I'm humbled by it, and I think that was a big factor. And he wants us to unify as a conference and to get the job done, and we must.
But you see, the holdouts, they are telling a different story. For some members, it actually wasn't Donald Trump's call that convinced them to ultimately change their votes. Here's what South Carolina Republican Ralph Norman said.
Trump was able to convince you.
Where are you trying to go?
No, what Trump? I knew what Trump's doing. It was worth my vote. You never know how these things are going to come out. I didn't know how everybody was going to vote, but I knew we needed to impress on Mike Johnson that we're serious about budget, we're serious about the border, we're serious, and is he going to fight?
Make no mistake, this was a shot across the bow for Mike Johnson and for Donald Trump. Ahead of the vote, Johnson issued a list of commitments, which included creating a working group to work with Elon Musk's pet project Doge, to issue a report of audits of federal agencies, and to ask House committees to do appropriations reviews. Well, Donald Trump did not fill Republican brains with fever dreams of working groups and financial reports. And clearly, their appetites were not sated by those comments. After today's Speaker vote, the 11 members of the House Freedom Caucus, well, they issued a list of demands of their own for Speaker Johnson, writing that they voted for Johnson despite their, quote, sincere reservations regarding the Speaker's track record over the past 15 months. More proof that Republicans aren't feeling especially confident about the House leadership. Today, the Republican-controlled House, they voted on a new rules package for the new Congress, and it included increasing the threshold that allowed just one member to initiate a vote to remove a speaker. That threshold increased to 9. Now, Speaker Johnson, I think it's safe to say he passed the first test of the new Congress, but it is possible that this is quite possibly the easiest vote he will have to wrangle votes for. The debt limit, which is scheduled, frankly, it was the unrest that started Johnson's whole kerfuffle last month, is coming up at the end of January. And that means that the United House Democrats will once again be a powerful force. Here's what House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar said on the House floor today.
In the 119th Congress, we will work with the incoming administration to make life better, safer, and more affordable for working families. And the incoming administration must also recognize that while my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are divided, and while compromise remains a dirty word for so many, Congress won't be able to keep the lights on, let alone pass anything of substance, without the buy-in and blessing of House Democrats and Hakeem Jeffries.
A standing ovation from House Democrats on the floor. In today's Speaker vote, every single Democrat in the chamber, in that party's diverse caucus, they united behind House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. And before presenting the gavel to Mike Johnson, Jeffries had this to say.
We will push back against far-right extremism whenever necessary. So let me be clear. Social Security and Medicare are not entitlement programs. They are earned benefits. Hardworking American taxpayers pay in to Social Security and Medicare every day, every week, every month, every year throughout their entire adult life. They've earned those benefits, worked hard for those benefits, and deserve those benefits. So as Democrats, our promise to the American people is that we will fight hard to make sure that no one in this town takes away Social Security or Medicare from the American people. Not now, not ever. No means never. Our position is that it is not acceptable to cut Social Security, cut Medicare, cut Medicaid, cut veterans' benefits, or cut nutritional assistance from children and families in order to pay for massive tax breaks for billionaires and wealthy corporations. House Democrats will fight hard to protect working class Americans and the things that matter to them, not the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. Keep your hands off Social Security and Medicare. 2 months ago, the American people elected Donald Trump as the 47th President of the United States of America. Thank you for that very generous applause. It's okay. There are no election deniers on our side of the aisle. You see, one should love America. One should love America when you win and when you lose. That's the patriotic thing to do. And that's the America that House Democrats will fight hard to preserve because we love this country. Democrats will never abandon the long walk toward freedom. We will fight hard to defend the freedom of opportunity that makes the American dream possible. We will fight hard for the freedom to vote and to fight for a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We will fight for the freedom to organize and join a union of your choice. We will fight to defend the free enterprise system, but work hard to make sure that it actually works for working class Americans. And we will always defend a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions.
Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia of California. He is a member of the House Homeland Security and Oversight Committees. You're not a betting man, but did you have it that Johnson was going to become Speaker on the first ballot today?
Honestly, we didn't know. I think that it's pretty clear that he probably cut some last-minute deals to win on that first ballot. It was open for a long time. So
2 hours, I believe.
Yeah, it was open for a long time. We weren't sure what was going to happen. But, look, the same is true whether that happened on the first ballot or the second or third, is that the Republican House Conference is divided. It's still a mess. He's got fractions all over the place. And at the end of the day, he's giving away a lot, I think, to the most extreme members to get some of those votes.
We just played a lot of what the House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries had to say in his remarks prior to handing the gavel to Speaker Johnson. And I liked everything Hakeem Jeffries had to say except the first minute of what he was talking about. Because in the first minute of his remarks, he said the time for campaigning is over. The election is over. It's time to put down the swords of the campaign swords, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, and pick up the bipartisan plows to do the work. And nice sentiment. Okay, but then you got Speaker Johnson that gets up there right after him, and he lays out the Republicans' priorities in new Congress, saying their goal is to implement an American First agenda. He talked about how too many politicians over the last couple of years have done the opposite of what needs to happen now. And then he had this to say about cutting back the size and scope of government. We'll play it real quick.
We're going to drastically cut back the size and scope of government. We're going to return the power back to the people.
Does that sound like the plow of bipartisanship? Because that's going to cut jobs.
Look, Mike Johnson has real no interest in bipartisanship. I mean, that's clear. He takes his orders from Donald Trump and now Elon Musk. And we know what they want to do. And Mike Johnson has fully gone in on this DOGE committee or whatever that's going to be that essentially wants to roll back rights, roll back hard-earned benefits and programs like Social Security, like Medicare. And we know that Elon Musk now controls essentially the Republican Party. And they're talking about things like eliminating the Department of Education. And so I think Mike Johnson has completely bought into the Elon Musk agenda, which is essentially huge tax cuts for Elon Musk and his billionaire friends. That's what the fight in this Congress is going to be. It's going to be against the billionaires, against Elon Musk, and Donald Trump trying to do everything in his power to enrich his friends.
I get a lot of questions from folks on, on my little social media. I always ask people, like, what's on their minds? And the number one question I've gotten over the last couple of days is, do Democrats have a plan? What are Democrats going to do? And it sounds like you all are ready to work with Republicans where it makes sense, but I'm looking to see where Republicans have said it makes sense to work with y'all.
I don't think there's going to be a lot of places where it actually is going to make sense, because at the end of the day, Republicans say they want to have border security, but what does it really mean? It means mass deportations. It means children in camps. It means not having any sort of pathways to work permits for people that have been here for 20 or 30 years. So the Republicans' idea of bipartisanship is we get everything you want, you get nothing. Oh, then, by the way, we're going to cut your benefits, redistribute that wealth, and then give it to our billionaire friends.
So what's the plan for House Democrats?
Look, first of all, we've got to be ready to fight like hell every single time. And I think Hakeem Jeffries, our leader, understands that. He knows that. You're going to see in the last Congress a lot of the same thing, where we stopped a lot of bad things from happening. In this Congress, we're going to stop a lot of really bad things from happening. They're going to try to repeal Obamacare. We're going to push back on that with everything that we've got. And their plans, their grand scheme of plans, is to reshape benefits in this country for working class people. They want to change programs that people have worked their entire lives to support. On top of that, they want to roll back rights for women, roll back rights for gay people, roll back civil rights that we've enjoyed in this country for such a long time. And so I think what's most important and what people want to see is Democrats in the fight. This is going to be a bar fight. We cannot sit around and kumbaya holding hands with Republicans, hoping that things are going to go our way, or hoping that they're going to cut us some bipartisan deal. That is not going to happen. And it makes no sense, none, to work with Elon Musk and his billionaire friends on trying to cut the government.
Well, Robert Garcia of California, someone with clarity about this 119th Congress. I appreciate your time, sir. It's good to see you. Congratulations on being reelected and sworn in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, today, New York Judge Juan Merchan rejected Donald Trump's attempt to overturn the jury verdict in the hush money case, and he actually scheduled Donald Trump to be sentenced a week from today, on Friday, January 10th at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. Now, Donald Trump may appear virtually or in person. In an 18-page order, Merchan made clear that he would not likely sentence Trump to jail, but he delivered a passionate defense of the jury's historic verdict. The significance of the fact that the verdict was handed down by a unanimous jury of defendants' peers after trial cannot possibly be overstated. Indeed, the sanctity of a jury verdict and the deference that must be accorded to it is a bedrock principle in our nation's jurisprudence. In May, a jury found Donald Trump guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in an attempt to illegally influence the 2016 presidential election by covering up his hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. Judge Juan Merchan described the case as one about premeditated and contentious deception by the leader of the free world. And he added this: to vacate this verdict on the grounds that the charges are insufficiently serious, given the position defendant once held and is about to assume again, would constitute a disproportionate result and cause immeasurable damage to the citizenry's confidence in the rule of law. Hear, hear. Joining us now is former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuade, a law professor at the University of Michigan Law School. Barbara, it's very good to see you. Did you have it on your bingo card that we would get this from Judge Merchan today?
No, I did not see this coming at all. I think maybe over the holidays we'd sort of forgotten about this case a little bit. The parties were battling. We've seen briefs. Donald Trump wanting to dismiss this case altogether. Alvin Bragg's office suggesting maybe that the whole thing be put on hold for the next 4 years. And the judge, obviously, over the past several weeks, working very carefully on this 18-page opinion. Now, I'm sure there are Trump critics and Trump supporters who will find this unsatisfactory. But what the judge said was important for him to do here was to balance three competing factors. One is the president's ability to do his job as the chief executive in his upcoming term. Two was to uphold the rule of law. And three was, as you just read there, deferring to the sanctity of the jury verdict. And so the judge thought that, yes, the conviction stands, but if we need to sentence Donald Trump, but he let it be known pretty clearly that he does not plan to sentence Donald Trump to any prison time.
Merchan's order seems to indicate that there will not be jail time, as you just noted. This is what he actually wrote. While this court, as a matter of law, must not make any determination on sentencing prior to giving the parties and defendant an opportunity to be heard, it seems proper at this juncture to make known the court's inclination to not impose any sentence of incarceration, a sentence authorized by the conviction, but one the people concede they no longer view as a practicable recommendation. As such, in balancing the aforementioned considerations in conjunction with the underlying concerns of the presidential immunity doctrine, a sentence of an unconditional discharge appears to be the most viable solution to ensure finality and allow defendant to pursue his appellate options. Can you explain unconditional discharge for us, Barb?
Yes. So it means this case will be ended. This judgment will become final. That is a conviction against Donald Trump for 34 counts, but there will be no conditions attached, no prison, no fine, no community service, no nothing. This would be the end of it. So unlike most defendants who will get some sort of consequence for a criminal conviction, the judge says in balancing all of these factors, including the upcoming presidential term, there will be no penalty for Donald Trump in this case.
All right, Barbara McQuade, thank you so much for joining us and breaking it down. Coming up, today's speaker vote was just the first of the many challenges Republicans will have when they try to do anything. That's next. The Republican Party under Donald Trump is about one thing and one thing only: what is good for Donald Trump. Gone are the core principles supposedly about states' rights, small government, and low taxes. Donald Trump never cared about that. He just says whatever he needs to say in the moment, even if it is a ludicrous contradiction. Trump claims to love American working men, but pays Chinese workers to make his Bibles. He was totally against China-based TikTok, but after meeting with a billionaire Republican investor, now Trump loves TikTok. And now that the billionaires of Silicon Valley have decided flattering Trump will help make them even more money, with Elon Musk leading the way, Donald Trump is all too happy to give the tech bros everything they want at the expense of the MAGA faithful who put him back into office. You've probably heard about this fight over H-1B visas. Well, simply put, Elon Musk and his tech bros want the visas for foreign high-skilled workers because it's good for business. It is so important to Elon Musk, he said, quote, "I will go to war on this issue." But what about Trump's promises to the red hat wearing crowds about America first? Well, Vivek Ramaswamy doesn't think Americans should be the first hires into good paying tech jobs. He thinks, quote, "The reason top tech companies often hire foreign-born and first-generation engineers over Native Americans is that our American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for way too long." Okay, Vivek Ramaswamy. The tech bros and apparently Donald Trump think Americans are too dumb and or lazy to compete for these tech jobs. A few days ago, talking specifically about H-1B visas, Trump told the New York Post, "I've always liked the visas. I have always been in favor of the visas. That's why we have them." Now, even the New York Post didn't completely buy that, because the report also pointed out, quote, Trump restricted access to foreign worker visas in his first administration and has been critical of the program in the past. Among the MAGA faithful, the loudest voice railing against these visas is Steve Bannon, and he has aimed his criticism, at least for now, only at Elon Musk.
You can be part of this, but you're not going to sit here and lie to us to our face and expect to say, oh, because you're worth $500 billion, you people that are taking money, take money. I don't care. Bow down and kowtow. I don't care. I could care less. I'm a crazy frickin' Irishman. 100% moratorium on all immigration until we get this thing sorted.
It is not just a visa issue. This is a symptom of Rorschach Trumpian politics. It's whatever you want to believe. Trump has been able to survive the last 4 years from the cheap seats by focusing conservatives on their shared hatred of broad targets like the media and the deep state, whatever that is. Well, we are about to find out what happens when Trump, Elon Musk, and his sidekick, Mr. American Mediocrity, Mike Johnson, and all the unruly House Republicans who put Mike Johnson on notice today, and John Thune, have to agree on and defend actual legislation with actual spending cuts and actual policies. What about the people who voted for Trump? One 55-year-old single mom from Pennsylvania told the Washington Post recently, Trump is more attuned to the needs of everyone instead of just the rich. I think he knows it's the poor people that got him elected, so I think Trump is going to do more to help us. Joining us now is Jason Johnson, professor at the School of Global Journalism and Communication at Morgan State University. He's also an MSNBC political analyst. Jason, let's start where I ended. That last quote from this woman in Pennsylvania who voted for Trump. What say you?
I'm not surprised. I think that a lot of people who voted, and let's not forget, it's a very small margin. It was not a blowout. It looked one way on election night. It looked one way when we actually started seeing the numbers later. There are a lot of Americans that take Trump's general dislike for America as empathy for their individual struggle. So I'm not surprised. Look, if you're concerned about the price of eggs, if you're concerned about the price of gas, if you've been nervous ever since the sort of end of the COVID pandemic, there are a lot of Americans who think that Donald Trump understands that. They're wrong. He doesn't really care. The people he associates with don't really care. But I'm not surprised that this woman felt that way. And I think, obviously, a majority of people in Pennsylvania and a lot of other swing states felt the same way.
You know, this rift within the Republican Party apparatus currently is being referred to as a MAGA civil war. This is what Axios had to say about this civil war. Elon Musk condemned a segment of the MAGA movement as contemptible fools who should be purged from the Republican Party in a social media post Friday. The schism may force Trump to ultimately take sides between the largely white working class supporters who first made MAGA succeed and the techno-libertarian billionaires like Musk who are at the center of his new administration. My mother used to say, if it ain't about you, don't get in it, okay? Just don't put your nose in business that doesn't belong to you. But we are all watching this play out, and to be clear, I'm watching. But this is something that is going to test this movement, if you will.
I disagree, Simone, and here's why.
You don't think so?
That 55-year-old woman, no, that 55-year-old woman in Pennsylvania is not watching this conversation on Twitter. She's not. She's not. She is still excited. And the people who voted for Donald Trump are still excited. What is happening with this visa conversation, it is an online conversation. It is an elite conversation. It is not a conversation that, as of right now, is affecting most of the men and women who actually voted for Donald Trump. Now, do I think it's bad? Of course it is. Do I think it reveals that you have a conflict in the Republican Party between nativists and white nationalists? Of course you do. Do I think it reveals some of the racism of a certain class of people like Vivek Ramaswamy? Of course it does. But is that going to ultimately impact how Congress behaves? I don't think we know yet. And until, frankly, I know exactly what job, I don't know what security card Elon Musk has or Vivek. I don't even know what their technical jobs are at this point. Right now, they're just two guys talking like influencers online. So until we see this manifest in policy, it's just yapping from a bunch of basically palace intrigue Republican elites.
I mean, I'm going to be honest. I don't think they're going to get a swipe card because this isn't an actual agency of the United States government that was created. They do not have any appropriated funds, if you will. DOJ doesn't. It is for all practical purposes, a working group that, frankly, which is, that's what it is. But this point that you just made about this is an elitist conversation among the MAGA folks. I listened to Mike Johnson give his speech today when he accepted the Speaker's gavel for the 119th Congress. And he laid out this America First agenda. He talked about cutting the administrative state. Those are cutting jobs. Those are not just Democrats or people that voted for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. That will affect people across the board, and disproportionately, I think, a number of folks that perhaps cast their ballot for Donald Trump and this MAGA movement. So do you not think that when the chickens come home to roost in that way, or let's just say they actually try to take a real swipe at Social Security, that people might not say, well, wait, what's going on here?
Well, Simone, look, we are all in agreement that the next 2 years are going to be the find out phase, right? But how that manifests itself depends on whether or not these Republicans are actually able to accomplish anything. Look, we all talked about Project 2025 in the latter part of 2024. They were going to get rid of all these government programs. You and I both grew up in parts of the Midwest, right? There are some small, deeply red towns where the biggest job there happens to be the federal government, whether it's a NASA's office or National Science Foundation, Weather Foundation. There's all sorts of places where the federal government is the major employer. And they're talking about hacking all those jobs. They're talking about getting rid of all those jobs. When that happens, if that happens, maybe those people turn around and decide that they're going to blame the Republican Party. They're going to blame them for listening to some foreign influencer who doesn't really know anything about American government. Or maybe they won't. Because I think if people were really concerned about the economy and really concerned about policy, we wouldn't have the administration we have now, who was promising to cut their jobs, but people still thought, hey, it's not going to happen to me.
Well, talk about it, Jason Johnson. Thank you for joining us tonight, my friend. Get some rest. Coming up, there are 4 days until Election Day in 2 key races in the Virginia state legislature. The 2 Democratic candidates running will join me ahead of their last weekend of campaigning. That's next, right here. This is the last weekend of campaigning for 2 Democrats in 2 key special elections in Virginia. While many national Democrats have spent the last 2 months since Election Day in conversation about the future, in Virginia, Election Day was the first day of the next campaign. That campaign ends Tuesday with a special election for state Senate, where Democrats currently hold a 21-19 majority. There's also a special election in the state House. Now, it is hard work to knock on doors and convince people to vote for you in a presidential election year. But talk about campaigning in the wake of what happened in November and during the holiday season. Whew, that's a tall order, but it is oh so very important. And I'm going to be honest, I'm very biased because I once worked in the Virginia House of Delegates. America's policy, folks, it is made in our state legislatures. Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin, he is actually term limited. So Democrats have a real chance of winning the governor's race in November. But the success of a potential Democratic-led government in Virginia, it actually starts with winning these special elections and keeping control of the state legislature. Joining us now are 2 Democrats running on January 7th. Virginia delegate Kanyan Srinivasan is running for Virginia Senate, and J.J. Singh is running for Delegate Srinivasan's seat in the House of Delegates. Both are running to represent parts of Loudoun County outside of Washington, D.C. Thank you both for joining me today. Can we just start with the stakes of this race? Because it is my understanding that losses in either 2 of these seats would result in potentially Republican control or a power sharing agreement having to happen in one or both of the chambers. So, Delegate Srinivasan, can I start with you? Just the stakes here in this election and how it's been campaigning in the wake of November, that November election.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. Yes, the stakes are very high. As you rightly said, it is a thin majority that we have in the General Assembly. In the Senate, it's 21-19. There are many things on the line. Women's right to choose, number 1, is on the line. The constitutional amendment is on the line. My opponent has clearly said that she will vote against it and she will ban abortion. So that's clearly on the line. Common sense gun safety is on the line. Investing in public education is on the line. Investing in climate change is on the line. We had 2 years of majority 2 years ago in the General Assembly, and Democrats did amazing things. When we had trifecta, we did outstanding work. So as you rightfully said, we have the chance to have a trifecta next November, but it starts with this important election. That's why I'm running. I'm a son of 2 school teachers. I'm the first Indian American immigrant elected to the Virginia House of Delegates. And I am very excited about this. I've been knocking thousands of doors, and people want to hear, people want to push back. People are concerned about many things, including the new administration.
You know, Mr. Singh, the delegate makes a really important point here. And let's just drive the point home from the last conversation I was just having with Jason Johnson. The Augusta Free Press had a column on Glenn Youngkin backing Donald Trump and Elon Musk's plan to cut federal spending in parts of the federal government. They write this: Glenn Youngkin thinks that 300,000 Virginians whose jobs seems to be on the line with Donald Trump's promise to dismantle the federal government can just get a job somewhere else. That may result in some job losses in federal government. I think that efficiencies oftentimes do result in that, said Youngkin, a former hedge fund guy with a net worth north of $400 million. So yes, he feels your pain there, folks. Mr. Singh, this Loudoun County is home to a number of individuals that disproportionately have ties to working for the federal government. Virginia particularly has one of the largest military employees in the Commonwealth. Talk about the stakes here as it relates to what could potentially be coming down the pipeline in Virginia.
I mean, you said it best. I was born and raised right here in Northern Virginia. Both of my parents spent their entire careers working for the Department of Veteran Affairs. The federal government is integral to the economy of Northern Virginia. It's integral to the economy of the entire Commonwealth. And it's not just federal government employees, it's members of our military who serve on our bases here. So the disruption that they're trying to put into place could have really significant impacts here in Virginia.
I am just struck by the fact that while many folks were wringing their hands about the last election and talking about pontificating about how to talk to voters, the two of you are out there actually talking to voters. Delegate, what have you been hearing from folks out there on the ground?
People are concerned about many things, Simone. I mean, they're concerned about dilution of their rights. They don't want their children to have less rights than what they have. That's very concerning to them. They're very concerned about the jobs. They're very concerned about the uncertainty of the new administration. Healthcare is another big one. I got involved in politics only because of healthcare. I got hit by a truck when I was a student in early 90s. My wife's rare surgery. Those two incidences made me realize how broken our healthcare system is. You know, we have wonderful doctors, nurses, and specialists, but our healthcare system is broken. People are very concerned about that. People are concerned about cost of tuition, about public education. The other side wants to cut public education. Democrats were the first to invest heavily in public education last year in our budget. I was very proud to support that. So people are concerned. People are concerned about gun safety. We have had 84 school shootings, and they are very, very concerned about that. So, you know, we have the policies. We are the party of good governance, and we can deliver to all Virginians. And that is the message that I talk about at every door.
Mr. Singh, how are you going to spend your last weekend campaigning?
Knocking on doors. We've knocked on thousands of doors so far, and I want to tell you what I'm hearing, which is very similar to what the delegate's hearing. Excuse me. The first is I have two daughters who are in public school, and I care about reducing gun violence. Gun violence is the #1 cause of death for kids. The second thing is we talk about reproductive freedom. My two daughters have fewer rights than my wife did before the Dobbs decision. The third thing that I'm talking about with voters at the doors is, as what the delegate mentioned, college tuition. When I went to the University of Virginia, tuition, room and board was $15,000 a year, and now it's $40,000 a year. The situation is totally untenable. We have a public institution that's requiring parents, if they can afford to help at all, to choose between funding their own retirement or their kids' education. And so when we talk about voters about these issues, it's getting them excited, it's getting them enthused, it's getting them to see the stakes, it's getting them to see the importance of coming out. And so we're going to keep doing it. I knock doors in the snow. And one thing I'll mention about the stakes, my mom, who was 76 years old, recent knee replacement surgery, with 8 of her friends, who I call super aunties, knocked on doors in the snow. If they can do it, the rest of us can do it.
Hear, hear. Election Day is January 7th, Virginia. Get out there and vote. Delegate Kanyan Srinivasan, candidate for Virginia Senate, and J.J. Singh, candidate for Virginia State House. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Coming up, There was some good news in 2024, folks. History was made in the United States Senate today. 2 black women serving together, and I am so excited to be able to discuss it with my next guest, the trailblazing former Senator Carol Moseley Braun. 32 years ago, history was made when our next guest, Carol Moseley Braun, became the first black woman to serve in the United States Senate. She was the sole black woman to serve in the Senate until 2017, when Kamala Harris was sworn in to serve as California's senator, and then again in 2023 when LaFonda Butler filled a vacancy after the death of Dianne Feinstein. There have only been 3 black women to serve in the Senate since Carol Moseley Braun. That is until today. For the first time ever, 2 black women will serve in the Senate at the same time. Lisa Blunt Rochester of Delaware and Angela Alsobrooks of Maryland.
Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which you are about to enter, so help you God. Congratulations, Senators. Congratulations. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which you are about to enter, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations, Senators.
Joining us now is former Democratic Senator Carol Moseley Braun of Illinois. Senator, it is an honor and a pleasure to see you here tonight, to have you here in studio. I know you were at the Capitol today. Tell us, we saw it on TV. Tell us how it was in the room.
Oh, it was wonderful to be here. I'm just so excited about what's going on in the Capitol now. I can't tell you, I was beside myself. I didn't get a chance to actually be there for the swearing in, the actual taking of the oath, but I was there with their families, and I'm so proud of these 2 women.
You know, when now Senator Alsobrooks, formerly county exec of Maryland, when she won on election night, she was quoted as saying in her speech that it is remarkable to think that in 2 years, America will celebrate its 250th birthday. And in all those years, there have been more than 2,000 people who have served in the United States Senate, and only 3 have looked like me. When you sat down, you said, "Oh, has it been 32 years?" And I'm like, "Yes, it has been 32 years." The fact that it took 32 years, and we are only now at a point where only the first time where 2 black women are serving consecutively. These are the history. This arc is remarkable, but it is also, I think, slightly disappointing because, and you're like, why is it disappointing? It's disappointing because there are young people out here like myself who wonder, why does it have to take so long?
Well, as we said before we got on camera, he works in mysterious ways.
Yes, he does.
And this is the way it was supposed to play out, and it did. And I'm just so proud of these 2 women who are now stepping into the Senate chamber with great committee appointments. They're going to be able to do a lot of good for a lot of people, and that really is a whole thing. It's not personal to any one of us, to one of them, but that's the real meaning of this, is that they get to do the work, the people's work, and with double force.
And represent all the people. I mean, it's what they both said in both of their campaigning out there on the trail. I interviewed both of them in the course of the election, and they never talked about elect me because I'm going to be the first. Elect me because I'm going to make history. Elect us so we can serve together. They talked about the focus and the work of the people. And when you first came into Congress, I mean, you were a part of a historic class in that Congress yourself.
Well, all the women, right?
Yeah.
I was telling the story today that when I first got elected, there was no bathrooms for women. There was one stall set aside.
One stall?
One. And that was it. So they were clearly not anticipating more than one or two people at most being there at any given point in time. And now, obviously, it's changed. They've reconstructed the bathrooms, and so there's room for all these ladies. And it's really great. It's gratifying to see and to witness and to be part of.
When women are in the room, things change. Maryland Matters had an article today talking about the Congressional Black Caucus and marked its historic first as his membership hits a record. They write, the Congressional Black Caucus celebrated a number of landmarks Friday, a record 62 members of Congress in the caucus, 2 Black House members from Alabama for the first time, and the historic first of 2 Black women elected to the same Senate class. With these numbers in the House specifically, the Congressional Black Caucus is going to wield, I think, an outsized amount of power. Republicans can't get anything done in the House without Democrats, and Democrats can't move an agenda without the entirety of their caucus, chief among them, the members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Talk about that significance.
Well, I think it's significant because it means that the Senate, the legislature, both House and Senate, are beginning to look more like America. And the more we look like America, the better and more vital our democracy is. And I'm just thrilled that I got to live to see all of this.
Well, I'm thrilled that you are here today. And as a point of personal privilege, I used to work for Vice President Harris, and she spoke often very fondly of the heroes and the shoulders of whom she stood on, and yours was absolutely one of them. So thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Former Senator Carol Moseley Braun. We appreciate it. Tonight's last word is next, folks. Stick around. A quick programming note before we go. You can see me, Alicia Menendez, and Michael Steele on the weekend. Tomorrow morning, former Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn will join us. Then on Sunday, we have former January 6th Committee co-chair, Congressman Benny Thompson. We'll also have D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. And that is ahead on the weekend, starting right here on MSNBC at 8 a.m. Eastern. And that is tonight's last word.